Welcome guys in my studio, the on-off lab, and yeah, I just wanted to show you guys a little bit about Forever, about how I made the song, how it came together, the whole story behind it, and show you my little secrets. So yeah, this is the project basically. I think I started this song because I remember working on this when I was in Aspen, which I think is like almost a year ago right now. But this song started out, like the whole melody, when I was having a writing camp or like a writing session here in my studio, and I think with like three writers, and one of them was early, so we just kind of like sat down, we were messing around, like just, you know, starting up, and he just started like jamming on the guitar, and I just started messing around a bit in the computer, and actually in like 5 minutes we basically put down this, like the lead melody of the song, which is basically this. Like basically the lead melody. We basically put that down in like 5 or 10 minutes, and yeah, people always ask me like, how do you make a melody? How do you come up with melodies? And it's something that's kind of like, it's super hard to explain, because it's just like you're just messing around basically and just jamming and trying out stuff, and it just comes up in your head. It's like, I can't explain, there's not like a theory for it, or like I first do this and that. It's just mostly I start with like bass notes, so there is somewhat of a structure, but it's not always the same. Sometimes I have like a top melody which I then like just draw in the piano roll, and then I start adding bass notes. But it can also go the other way around. So there's not really like one, there's not like a right way to do it, but also not a wrong way to do it then. So that's how this song started out, with just basically that lead melody and those chords. And then later on in that session, we kind of tried to write a top line on top of those chords, which, I don't know, was kind of hard. It didn't really work out. We had a top line, which we ended up not being super happy with, but I did use a little part of that top line, which is the vocal you, for instance, hear in the build. Which is, yeah, kind of straightforward. So that's all we ended up using from that session. And then when I had that melody, the first thing I did is just trying to build the drop. A lot of times I start working from the break and then I work towards the drop, but this time it went the other way around. And yeah, what I basically did was, well, you know me for these kind of chords. Which are basically all just saw chords, silent. You can just basically also get an init preset, and it would sound very similar to this. Another silent, which is actually an init. Like, it's just an init, and which I kind of tweaked with some white noise. Another saw. Another silent, which this is more like a super saw, like super wide and like super big. And then synth master. And what I do basically, the melody that I had was more like straight notes, like more playing like these notes. Like more straighter notes playing. And then when I try to make the drop out of those chords, I just cut them up basically to make the groove of the song. So this would then just be, you know, straight. Everything would be just long notes, and then I'm just gonna start cutting into those notes and try to make an interesting groove. And then my idea for the whole song, like when I heard this melody, I instantly had the feeling of it like being a super big, like wide festival song. So yeah, that's the feeling that came to me right away when I heard that melody, and I started like going through just like preset banks and stuff, and I ran into this one in Serum. Nope, not that one. Yeah, this one. Which I kind of tweaked, but it's like super high pitched. It's kind of like a little bit. It kind of hurts on your ears, but this together, I just ran into this by accident. I had the chords, and I was like, okay, the chords sound like this. But that still kind of missed the whole big feeling. That sounds a bit better already, but then I started like looking around preset banks and stuff. Like honestly, to be honest, I'm not that strong in like sound design and stuff. So I work a lot with banks and presets, and you know, that's also somewhat of a hobby of mine, just searching around the internet looking for preset banks and interesting sounds, and that's basically how I found all of these, which then I obviously tweak to make them sound like how I want them to sound. For instance, this one, Serum is taking its time. Turn off the chords. Like all these leads, like by themselves, they sound pretty shitty. But all together, it's pretty strong. Like super wide and like super powerful. And I messed around with the LFOs and some, because some had like a super weird vibrato, which kind of makes it sick and wide, but I don't want it to be too much. So yeah, that's basically the main part of this song is these chords and that lead. that's basically the heart of the song. And then all the leads, I run all those leads through a bus, which is here. These are all the leads together. What I then always try to do is, like, you know, remove all the reverbs in the plugin itself, in Serum itself, and then have the same reverb for all the leads together, which didn't really work out for this song because the reverbs in Serum kind of like made the sound how it sounded, like made it really was part of how the sound is. So I didn't do that in this song, but there's just like a simple, super short sidechain, which really gives that pumping feeling. Just an OTT to just really pack everything together. And then a BX control to make it just a tiny bit more stereo and make sure that everything below 150 Hertz is mono, which I cut out anyway. Like there's a low cut on most of the lead, on like all the leads basically. But just to be sure that there isn't anything going weird, any weird things going on in the low end. And then basically on all of them there's a little bit of EQ. I love this string preset, which I then tweak, which this preset basically boosts the highs. Well, this one I mostly cut out with then this EQ again. But it makes it sound a little bit more crispy, just boosts up the high end. Which I do for all those leads. And then what I did here is a little trick. Then I run that bus, I run that to another bus, which then has reverb on it. Let's see. This is aux11. Yeah, right here. Which basically just has a reverb, and that reverb has is sidechained, which is then being triggered by the synths themselves. So when the synths stop playing, you'll hear the reverb. So for instance, which is basically to just kind of fill up the gaps in between and this gap. And the reverb then has an OTT just to compress it. Just cut out basically all of this because you don't really need that for this reverb. And yeah, you can kind of like properly control your reverb a little bit more like that, and it just gives a cool bigger effect. Then for the bass lines, let me close all of this. I always have like a separate sub layer, which just plays the sub bass. It's like super low, and you really feel that in your stomach. I basically cut out all of the higher frequencies because this sub is really just about that low end. I have this plugin which is called Bark of Dog, which is, I don't know if you guys know, what's the plugin called again? It's Waves. Oh yeah, R-Bass. which kind of like it kind of like generates harmonics on your bass for like, so like for the low frequency. Well, this basically does kind of the same, and it just boosts your low end. It's like around, I boosted here at around 45 hertz. I don't know if you can hear it. Only if you, like, if you're listening on headphones, you can probably hear it. It just gives that low end an extra punch. It makes it go like nice and super deep. Then just a side chain. And then a compressor. Just to like control it and don't have like, so it doesn't have any weird peaks. That I run through a bus then again, and then I basically bus together the complete bass line with like all the sounds. So you have the sub bass, you have the mid basses, which are like the crunchy basses. This is just for like the high end to give that like a nice crunch. And this is more like for the mid. And then that together with the sub. Which is then going through a compressor to just glue it all together. And then what I did for the bass line to just make it a little bit more interesting is pitch bending the first note, which you can see here. Just that little effect. Just to make it a little bit more interesting. And then the kick, which for this song is a super short kick because the side chain is also like super tight, so I just don't want the kick. You see, I actually used an LFO tool on my kick, which people think is kind of strange, I believe, but it's just to like, I can, you know, in LFO tool I can properly see like the waveform of the kick, and what I then do is I open up the LFO tool of my bass line as well. So like here I can properly make sure that my bass is not interfering with my kick. Like I can see the waveforms. So I just make the kick shorter so it doesn't interfere. And then I have a cool plugin, like I have two kicks. One is which apparently is Axwell's kick. I don't know, I just got it from someone. Like, you know, producers kind of always like we send each other like a lot of stuff. Like, you know, sometimes I'm just like talking to like a fellow colleague and we're just like, you know, I have this bunch of cool sounds, and you just, you know, you just exchange stuff, and like that's how you just kind of like build up like a whole database with kicks and samples and like all kinds of stuff. And then I have this kick which I used in Chasing Shadows as well, and I think a bunch of other songs, so I think Won't Stop as well. But I really like the top click of that kick. So what I did is just, you know, completely made it like super short with just a fade, and then with LFO tool again, and just cut out all the low end, so I only have, like I don't have, but just that top click. It just gives it that extra punch. And then I have a cool plugin. This is like a tape warmer. It's called Magnetic 2. And I actually use that on all my kicks now. You can hear the difference like right away. It's like, you know, it's not bad, but it just gives that extra punch and like that extra warmth. And then the snares. Well, this is just like a Vengeance loop. And this is one I stole from Swack. Actually, I think we used this in Ravenwood. And then in the second half of the drop, I have an extra snare, which hits like super hard. It's like kind of like a more old school sounding snare, which is just from Splice. It's like a retro snare. And just, you know, some rides and some claps just on the kick. Just a clap. Another clap. And then I actually have a hat on the kick as well, playing. Just to give that little high impact. And then what I did in the, like halfway the drop, I have a bit crusher on the chords. Which I thought sounded super sick, like it's kind of like that old school crushed. Which is just automated, like I just automated the downsampling of it. Which gives that sick sound. And it's just filtered. Just as like a cool kind of fill effect. And then some risers and stuff. Just like a kind of laser synth, which is just rising up. Just to build tension. Which is just like a Splice sample. More just a lifter. And actually, like the older version of this song, the break was kind of different. Like more, I actually played this as my intro on a bunch of festivals. You can hear that it was like a note, a semitone lower. I pitched it up. Rolling break. Unfortunately, no top line like this one. Like more like kalimbas playing, but I ended up wanting it to be more like of a progressive house song with like a super atmospheric break. With like this ARP, just, you know, I could listen to this all day basically. This just totally makes the whole vibe. And then I just have the chords playing. I basically just strip down the chords how I have them play in the drop to just these long notes. And you know, here you can see I kind of went from the drop and then moved back to the break and kind of made the break from stripping down parts from the drop. So yeah, I have those chords. Well, that's basically the same kind of chords that are playing in the drop, but then filtered. And this kind of like hovering synth. Which I made from scratch. I kind of kept the break super simple, but like really vibey and like really like atmospheric. And I have like a bunch of sounds that really make the atmosphere, like the ARP, as I said. But I also have like this vocal chop, which, if you listen closely, I actually used this one in Live Like This as well. And I felt like, you know, I dropped it in, and I was like, you know, I've used this in a song of mine. Like it's fine to be stealing from myself, and it just worked. So I felt like, you know, why not? And then the orchestral drums, which are just from like a Cashmere pack, which make it like super epic, and you know, the film drums. And then I just took the kick from the drop, filtered all the high end. There's just like a simple filter here, which just cuts out all the high frequencies. Like on a big festival, you really feel that kick like in your stomach. So yeah, the breaks are actually pretty basic, but sometimes it's like, for instance, with this song in the previous version, the breaks were like way more complicated and like way more sounds and kalimbas and pianos and like drums and bass lines. And sometimes when you're working on a song, it's just better to dive in and strip stuff out and make it more simple than overcomplicating things. Because like sometimes when you add too many sounds, it can just take away from like those couple sounds that are in there that are really like making the song, but they're not shining through because there are like so many other sounds that are like interfering and like, you know, just break the vibe. And then I have those vocals, which, like, when I heard those the first time, it really gave me like goosebumps. It feels like somewhat, almost like Chris Martin, Coldplay. Which is just basically, we just recorded this. And there's like a tuner just to make sure it's all in tune. just a compressor, and some EQing, just the low ends. And then I run that to a bus which has the reverb, so I just can control the reverb here. And then I run the sound itself to another bus which has like more EQing. Like whenever I feel like there's sounds conflicting in FabFilter Pro Q, it's like you can really analyze like what's going on and just search the frequencies which are like bothering. Just another low cut to make sure. Then I have Micro Shift, which is from Sound Toys, which kind of detunes the sound, which just makes it spreads it a bit more. It's like a bit more stereo and a bit more wide. Then I actually have another reverb here, 2 reverbs actually. This one is just like super pretty sounding reverb. I love this one, reverb from Waves. Then another reverb. I don't know. I just was like going crazy messing around with reverbs, and sometimes it just works. And that what I did for the second break actually. We recorded this. I think this is actually like exactly how we recorded it. Just pull off. That's what we recorded. Then pitch, alter boy, just to switch up the format, to make it sound a little bit more. Like a little bit more like computerized, compressor, EQ. And then what I did was I just put that in flex pitch because I didn't really like the melody that he was singing, or I mean I kind of like wanted to switch up the melody. So yeah, I kind of pitched these notes a bit, as you can see. First it was just going down, and I pitched it up at the end, which kind of sounded more interesting. And then yeah, the second drop, what I always try to do is make the second drop hit just slightly bit harder than the first drop. And how I did that here is like I just had this ride which isn't in the first drop, like super sharp, which just gives it a little bit extra punch. Yeah, in this song it's basically just the most important thing is the whole melody, and you know, sometimes with melodies it's also a little bit of luck, like sometimes it just happens naturally and it just flows. And then what all the producers always ask about is the master chain, which is, I do have to say I did send this song off for mastering after I finished it. That's why it's all nice and organized, which my songs usually aren't. But yeah, it's just an ozone, which basically is like the basic house preset, which I then tweaked. An EQ boosting the highs a little bit, harmonic exciter boosting like the highs, low end. This is all, I think, standard. Just the low end, like the low end isn't stereo. And then just like making some bands a little bit wider. And then the maximizer, which just makes it loud, which is important. Then another ozone, which is the newer ozone, ozone 8. And this is basically just electronic clarity preset, which just makes it a little bit more, just a little bit brighter, and just a little bit louder again. Then I have a UAD plugin, which is the full tech. And I used the masterful and bright preset and then tweaked around with that a little bit. Which is basically just like an equalizer and yeah, basically an equalizer. Then I have a limiter. I always use the invisible limiter, which is just like you can really push it really hard without kind of like distorting the whole song. So yeah, this is just basically to make it louder. And then I have a fab filter, Saturn. Then a BX control, once again to just make sure the low end is a mono. I then used the Endless Smile, which is such a fun plugin. In the build-up, you can see it automating. You know, make the hands go up. What this basically is like there in this plugin there is like an EQ, there's a reverb, a delay, and I think a bunch of other stuff as well. But basically combines all those to like filter, reverb, and just to make build-up sound big. And just like a meter, just to check out if everything works out. And then in the second break I kind of changed up the chords a little bit. It's like a super pretty tiny mini piano. The rhythm is kind of weird, like you see, it's just off grid, which makes it sound interesting. Sometimes, like, you know, it's just fun to do some things a little bit different to make it a little bit more interesting. Then I have strings, which are from Labs, Spitfire Audio. This is like a super cool plugin for like really atmospheric sounds and pianos. Well then just the same chords from the first break, but then just the same. It's playing it the same way as that piano I showed. And then I just cut that up again in a little bit different rhythm just to make it move a little bit, and this is just playing. This is kind of like somewhat of an arp, which is basically just the chords. It's just like super dreamy and like vibey, and then the kick comes in again. You know, in a song it's all about like up and downs, you know. You can't just have a song which is always up there in energy, but it's, you know, you just bring back the energy and then to make that drop hit harder again. And then here that epic, you know, hands up moment. Which is basically all the leads and chords from the drop, but just without the sidechain. So yeah, that's basically the song. And then a little trick that I always do is like bring down the volume in the build-up just to make that drop come in a little bit harder. And what I even did actually is automate the stereo width of like the whole track. So making it, it's automating to be less stereo in the build-up, and then when it drops it goes back to full wide stereo to make it hit even harder. And then just some hi-hats in the drop and rides to make it move and groove a little bit more. So yeah, that's basically how I did this whole song, and I think, you know, it's now it seems kind of easy, but what's been really a key point is in this song, like it used to exist of way more sounds, and then at some point it just all became too much, and I just had to, like, you know, remove stuff and work back a little bit to get everything sounding clean, because at some point it's just too much and you have to just like get back to basic and what do you really need, like which sounds really make the song and which sounds are just basically there without actually needing to be there. So yeah, I hope you guys picked up something from this and enjoy the song, have fun, stay safe, jump around on this song, go stream it on Spotify, Apple Music, and I hope to see you guys soon somewhere. Peace.